Hi everyone, I am going to be doing my media presentation over Stephen Chbosky's The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Contrary to what I said on the first day of class, I know none of you probably remember this, but I feel awful for having lied unintentionally. This was actually the last young adult novel that I read, not the Harry Potter series. But I think part of me not realizing that it was a young adult novel was because there's really a bunch of profound and just really intellectual stuff happening within this book, especially with the way the writing is done. And two, I was 21 or 22 when I read this, and I completely, having been out of high school, still was able to project myself entirely into a lot of these situations. And I just kind of twisted the setting a little bit in order to really just have it basically be my life. And so having the impact that it did on me at 21 or 22, whenever it was that I read that in my youth, I completely didn't even acknowledge the fact that they were in high school and they were so young. To me, it just seemed more natural that they were my own age. So I think that's normally how it works with most books, though. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of run through my annotated bibliography and synthesize some of the thoughts that I found within those sources. So my first website was obviously, had to be a Debbie Downer. So Sherry Early had a very similar sentiment to what that lovely article, our first meeting that we read during our first meeting as a class, expressed, the all the issues that go with illustrating such mature content for such a young audience. When to introduce this to your children and when to step back and say, hey, maybe this isn't the right time. So she was not very happy with the way that Charlie was portrayed. She kept wanting to assume that something was wrong with him, that he had some sort of mental handicap or illness, and that's why he was viewing the world the way that he was, so nonchalantly, in such a wallflowery fashion. But I think she forgets that he's obviously reeling from the loss of his friend who recently committed suicide, and he's trying to cope through that and figure out how to go up from there. So she closes her article with the idea that she thinks there's a lot of better books out there that more accurately express the themes and topics that are addressed in this book. So thought I'd start off with that. My next two, by David Edelstein and Brianna Hare, kind of discuss the longevity of The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Edelstein, who's writing for NewYorkMagazine.com, is looking at the storyline from both a novel, the perspective of a novel, and the big screen debut that it had. So drawing from both of those, he looks at the characters, the actresses and actors they had portray the characters in the book, how he felt about that, but also just the content within the movie that was similar to the book. And he really thought that Chbosky did a great job both directing the film and obviously writing the novel. And he felt that largely Chbosky just got it all right. The whole high school experience, the being kind of isolated and unsure and tentative and all of this, to moments of complete euphoria and happiness where you don't think life can get any better. So he thought that that was a job well done, as did Brianna Hare, maybe not so expressively, but through other people. She kind of depicts how the novel came into being. Obviously, it's kind of been eclipsed by its movie counterpart. But it was published in 1999 by MTV, which I never thought to look, but that easy little MTV on the spine right there. Didn't even occur to me that that was a thing. So, as such, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which she refers to as Perks, so now I've started doing that. It approaches the teen problem novel a lot differently. Apparently that was a big thing in the late 90s, addressing a lot of adolescent angst in literature. And so she thinks that largely his language and the way that he depicts all of these things that are happening around him, or rather how Chbosky narrates through Charlie, that he's taken on a sort of different mentality in writing this, and he's taken a different approach to it, and that approach has made it so accessible to such a broad audience that she thinks it's going to have the longevity to carry it through generation after generation after generation. And so as the parents that were born in the late 90s, as they come to have children of their own, she is fairly certain that it will just withstand the test of time very, very well, just because how it's written and the content being so enticing and the language being so easily understood. So then obviously I had to include a situation in which a controversy arose and really questioned the integrity of my book here. So my next article was from Hemant Mehta. I don't know if I said that right, but it's close as I'm going to get. He is looking at the perks of being a wallflower as the epicenter of this huge controversy in a town in Illinois where a middle school teacher, junior high school teacher, decided to let her class pick their own curriculum. So in relinquishing her power, it was kind of just like, you pick the novels, but be ready to discuss them and analyze them accordingly. A group had picked The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and before that went through, before she allowed that to happen, she did say that they needed to get parental permission first. Well, panic ensued. The parents were not happy about the choice and the adult content of it, so they went straight to the school board to ban the book from the school entirely, not just from the classroom, not just from that class year, but just in its entirety didn't want it in the school. By the end of the article, you put together that Hemant Mehta is not a fan of people using their religious platforms, which he's pretty sure is exactly what this is, to tell kids what they can and cannot read, and tell them what their life is going to be about and what they need to do with it. He's not a fan of the censorship that goes with the religious agenda, and so this was a real problem to him. You do find out by the end of the article that the book was successfully banned, in which he has a plea for you to contact the board and try and appeal that. So they were going through the appeal process largely because he, from his research, noted that the case that was brought before the school board was not entirely well articulated, and people didn't exactly know what they were voting for or against, and also those who voted against it had never read the novel, so he didn't think that they could speak very clearly against it. So he ends with a little appeal asking you to help that middle school out, I think Hadley Junior High, in Illinois. Now I know we were only supposed to do 5 online outlets, but my last 2 I think really speak to the mass audience that has championed around The Perks of Being a Wallflower as a work of art, as a piece of literature that's worthy of critical approaches as far as interpretation and such is concerned. So I went ahead and kind of didn't lump them both together, but looked into both of them because I think it speaks a lot to our generation, to pop culture. So I have always considered that anything on Shmoop or SparkNotes must be a pretty big deal if this website has decided to look at a piece of literature with a critical eye. In saying that, The Perks of Being a Wallflower is indeed on Shmoop. So they include a lot of the same introductory information that was listed in the CNN article when it's talking about The Perks of Being a Wallflower being kind of a little MTV baby, if you will. And so obviously I thought it was very interesting that the book was published while Real World was still really big. I don't know if it's really big anymore. I don't think so. I think we have Jersey Shore and things. So yeah, this was published when Real World was really big, and it kind of dates the book a little bit. But then I also think how incredible that it's so relatively new and canonical in its own right that Shmoop has decided to include it on their website. obviously, the drug, sex, rock and roll themes that are in the book are discussed on the Schmoop page, but they also take a critical eye in looking at chapter by chapter summaries, themes, notable quotes, study questions, character development, analysis, and the like. So I think this speaks to how significant a work of literature The Perks of Being a Wallflower is. If enough people were reading it and assigning it in the classroom, that Schmoop decided to sit down and say, hey, let's look at this with a critical eye and have students interested to be doing the same thing. So obviously it's not the traditional canon or canonical sort of work that we're used to seeing on a Schmoop or SparkNotes webpage. But I think it's showing a shift in what we're kind of allowing into our classroom and what's becoming important for kids to read. And then my last article, the community post, 16 Times the Perks of Being a Wallflower was the best movie ever made, on BuzzFeed by David Steele. Admittedly, the title of the article is about the movie, but if you scroll through, and if you've seen both the movie and read the book as I have, you'd realize that all the points that were made, the 16 times that are mentioned, the quotes that go with those little screen grabs are straight out of the book, like word for word. So obviously BuzzFeed's really popular for their listography articles, and Steele kind of adapts this and adapts The Perks of Being a Wallflower and gives it just that many more audience members through posting it on BuzzFeed. So the article discusses kind of the beauty of the prose, the way it's spoken in the movie, the complexity of the characters, and the profound advice that kind of just emanates throughout it. So I think that was just a really great thing to see. Obviously, a lot of kids would rather go sit and watch a movie as opposed to read a book. But I think this takes a second look at both of those. And when you're reading through that list, you don't want it to be over. So after 16, you're hoping that there's even more, and there certainly is within the novel. And so I'm hoping that some people thought, oh, hey, maybe this would be something good to pick up and read through. So in kind of synthesizing all of this information, there's obviously a lot of controversy surrounding the mature content of the book, which is not surprising, although I was surprised at how frequently it must be used in classrooms to generate such controversy. How teachers have allowed students to read something that's so profound and so just intellectually just on a different level, to help students kind of see high school through a different lens, and to cope with everything that's going on better and differently, and just to see that other people go through the exact same thing. So we're all kind of our own little sort of weird. I thought that was great to see. And then obviously you have people that will be championing it from its debut as a novel into history. So hopefully we'll see where the canon takes The Perks of Being a Wallflower. But I'm super interested to hear how you might discuss this in your class, the sensitivity of the topics and themes mentioned, just suffering through the high school experience as we all do, or if you have nothing to add to this, I really hope that this wasn't entirely too painful for any of you. So thanks so much for listening, and if you haven't read The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I really hope you do.